My Bloody Valentine started off as as the second of my contractual obligations for John Dunning and Cinepix. The first movie that I was going to make, we had a problem with it, so John said, "Why don't you do your second movie first?" And I said, "Okay, what do we want? What is it about?" So he pulled out a one-sheet synopsis called The Secret, which was written by one of the producers in Montreal called Stephen Miller. He said, "Would you like to do it? It's a horror film." And I said, "I've never made a horror film before." And he said, "Well, you never made a comedy before. You made a comedy, so what's the problem?" I said, "Okay, well, in that case, let's do it." He hired a young man called John Baird from LA to write the script with me. And so I basically consulted on the script. We had a scene by scene ready in about 3 weeks, which John approved. And then I had to go off and find locations while John was writing the screenplay, because one thing that Mr. Dunning didn't tell me, this was in late July, early August, that we had to have this film ready in 1,200 theaters by January 23rd was when we had to deliver the film, so that they would have enough time to do all the prints ready for the big release on February 14th. So that's basically how it started. I would go off and look for locations, I'd come back, look at the screenplay, make my notes, leave to go find some other locations out in Nova Scotia, and then obviously by early September we were out there ready to shoot. We kept it totally secret. As a matter of fact, the last 3 pages of the screenplay were not in the screenplay at all, or not in the scripts that were given to the cast. And they started trying to figure it out, as obviously people would get killed off, so it couldn't be him. That was the whole idea, is to keep it as fresh as possible so that the actor would not be influenced knowing that he's actually the psychotic killer. It worked. It worked until the last day, when by that time, obviously, there were only 2 choices, TJ or Axel. So, and then basically they figured out it's got to be Axel, because TJ's the hero. He can't be dead. So, although, for a while we were actually thinking of pulling that plug and changing it around, but we decided to stick to the script, and John wanted us to stick to the script, so that's how it worked out. Trying to get a job. Those were the days of, it was the first wave of youth unemployment. Blue-collar jobs were getting less and less available. If you had no education, you went out west and you tried to find a job either in the oil fields or in some mines or in lumber and so on. But all those things were actually in a major recession at the time. So, and like so many people from the East Coast, the culture is so different, and you feel so isolated that even though you might be ready to take something, there's a certain, I guess, fear of even success, and you just can't do it. And obviously that was TJ's problem, is he could not do it. Well, that's the big story. That is actually the big story. Is when we showed up at the mine, obviously this was a very, very economically disadvantaged neighborhood we were at. The mine just closed. They were thinking of turning it into a mining museum. So everything we wanted obviously was okay, until we showed up. Once we showed up, we realized that, one, the mine was so fresh, the coal face was still not insulated, so that methane buildup would happen on a regular basis, especially on days when it was very cloudy and what's called low barometric pressure. The mines have chimneys, vent chimneys in them. And when the air is so heavy that it can't escape, so you get a methane buildup. Once there's a methane buildup, you got to get out. So that happened to us about 6 times. The other problem we had is, obviously, we bring all our lights, and then they tell us, well, you can't use those lights because they're not safetied. Any kind of spark could affect your safety. Well, we said, well, what can we use? They said, you can use 25-watt bulbs. Well, 25-watt bulbs is basically a very dim light. So we had to figure out how to shoot now. We had to scramble to find the fastest lenses available to us. Rumor has it, I cannot verify it, but rumor has it that we used the same lights that were the same lenses that Kubrick used on Barry Lyndon. Whether they were the same ones or the same type, I can't tell for sure. But they were the fastest available to mankind at the time, which obviously added a lot of money to our budget. Then we realized that even with that, the film stock we were using, which was the fastest film stock at the time, 5247, was just not fast enough, even with those lenses. So then we had to figure out a way how to push that. Now, pushing means it's a laboratory process. There was only one place in all of the United States or all of North America who did that, which was Chemtone in New York. So that added an incredible amount of cost again, because all our negative had to be shipped from Nova Scotia to Montreal, from Montreal down to New York, from New York back to Montreal, to us back in Nova Scotia. So that meant that if I shot something on Monday, I would be lucky to see those rushes the next Monday. So basically we were flying solo and blind all the way through this, which obviously added a certain amount of tension to the shooting. But after a couple of days, and after the first rushes we saw, everyone was so pleased, then it became not a problem anymore. As a matter of fact, it saved me 2 hours of sleep a night. No, everything we shot made it into the final film. The rest of the butchery happened because of the MPAA. Scenes were cut out. Obviously, most of the gore or the effects were cut out. Barely hints of it were left by the time the MPAA finished with us. Well, it started off because of the rush we had. The only way we could even get the MPAA's approval was that early January, while we were mixing the movie, negatives were already being cut. The soundtrack was already edited, so we were in the mix. At the same time, we sent our editor down to LA with a work print or a copy of the film. And the MPAA screened it, and again, the quote is from Jack Valentine: "Tell those Canadians to take their movie and go home." This is an X-rated film, to which obviously a lot of scrambling happened between John Dunning and Cinepix and Paramount. But by that time, the investment was so great that they just had to bend and say, okay, well, what would you like to cut out? So we had the first set of cuts. So then we had to go back into the mix, go back into the negative, go back into the sound reels, and recut it, reformat it, and carry on with the mix. That cut got screened. So then they said, okay, well, you still need to cut out this, you need to cut out that, you need to cut 10 frames of this, 8 frames of that, 12 frames of the other things. So then we would do that. And obviously reconform again, stop for a day, reconform, go back into the mix. Then they'd screen it again. And then the same thing would happen again. Cut out 10 more frames of this, 8 more frames of that. That whole scene has got to go. You can't save that scene by cutting out frames, so just that scene's got to go. This went on for about 4 rounds of argument and so on, until finally they said to us, okay, but you still need to cut out 6 frames of, I can't remember which scene, I think it was the one where the Yaks goes under Happy's. You got to cut out 6 more frames of that. And we said, there are no more frames. It's only the sound that's making you feel that way. And we finally had to prove that to them. And then finally we got our rating. We barely made the deadline to get it out. We were working 24-hour days, you know, in the editing, in the mixing studio. You know, we basically slept on the couch for a couple of hours and started again. It was the adventure of a lifetime, I'll tell you that. Well, right now, most of those gore effects would be CGI. The practical effects would only be some blood flow, and we wouldn't really care how much blood because we just augment it with CGI. In those days, obviously, everything had to be perfect. That's why we were working with Tom Berman, who was brought on because he was experimenting with these special effects that you could do in one shot. And the whole concept of this was, as much as possible, to do these effects in one shot so that it would really have the impact of real, as opposed to showing the gun, showing the impact, showing the gun smoking, showing the blood coming. So what we would do is we'd try and do all that in one. For instance, boiling off the young man's face with the hot dogs. That was 8 layers of makeup with different sensitivities to water. The first layer would turn red, then that would peel off, and the second layer would start bubbling and blistering, and that would peel off, and then a new layer would turn red, then another blistering, then pus, then so on and so forth. That shot was a 30-second long shot, which now has come down to like 8 frames of just his head being dunked. And it was kind of ironic because all that way through that, all you saw was bubbles of the water and hot dogs floating around his face. So, you know, that humor got lost in the translation, unfortunately. The only influence I really took into account was Black Christmas. I love the POV. I love that feeling of intimacy that you get from being in seeing through the eyes of the villain. The rest I made up because my goal was not to create or to imitate the horror tropes. My goal was actually, jokingly, we all said what we're doing is the Deer Hunter of horror films. My goal was to create a community, create characters that were authentic, create situations that were authentic, and the actual gore and the thrill was almost secondary. That's why I wanted them to be so impactful, because it wasn't the key to where I was coming from. I wanted to create something that would last as an examination of human beings. And obviously, it comes somehow or other, it's kind of worked. You know.
Hi, babe. How are you?
I'm fine.
Good to see you. Yeah.
I started casting off the beat sheet, off the scene by scene. We cast through Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver to find the actors that I thought could. The biggest thing for me was, because these were all relatively inexperienced actors, the biggest thing for me in this was to find a group of people who I thought could have the chemistry of looking like childhood friends who have grown up together. That was the most important aspect of what I was looking for. The only one that stood out from that, obviously, was TJ. And so for TJ, we tried to find somebody that had, for lack of a better term, a bit of a broomstick up his ass, if I may have allowed to say that. You know, bit of an outsider, bit of a rebel, the one that sort of didn't fit in 100% with the group. And that worked out quite well, both in the shooting and also while we were shooting. The social dynamics were exactly that also. Money. I think what happened was when Friday the 13th and Halloween did such great box office, it proved that the story and the effects were the stars, not necessarily the stars. So, which allowed Canada to play on an even field, on an even playing field, because we didn't need to get Hollywood stars for those kinds of movies. It wasn't the stars. So I think it allowed for us to compete on a level which we weren't able to compete before. Absolutely, absolutely. The biggest disappointment, obviously, for me was all that work we put into Bloody Valentine, and I jokingly called it my anemic Valentine by the time it was cut or destroyed by the MPAA. So honestly, I tried to forget the film. I remembered the good times. I remembered the fact that I did make it, even though it was just in my memory, because there was no other evidence of it anywhere else on how creative we were with the special effects. Then a few years later, I got it warmed up to it a little bit. And what was funny about it was, as I was making other movies, I'd sit in a taxi or something, and somehow or other I got to, why are you here? Well, I'm making a film. Any films I've ever heard of? And I'd mention some of the bigger films that I made, and no reaction whatsoever. And I'd say My Bloody Valentine. I'd say, oh man, I saw that film. That was really good. So that sort of warmed me up to it. And then by the time I think that fabulous punk band from Ireland decided to name themselves after the film, that brought in a whole new group of a whole new audience. And I was shocked on how it still resonated. And honestly, I've watched it, I think, about a year and a half ago with an audience, and I'm still surprised on how it resonates even today. The underlying story, the underlying characters, the underlying situations still to this day echo and resonate. So I think that's probably why. But I mean, I can't help it. Now I love it. Yes, I did. You know, my usual answer to that is, you know, how many movies have been made in the last 100 years? Hundreds of thousands. How many movies have been remade? Hundreds. So I take that as a compliment. And that's about as far as I would like to go on that.
It can't be happening. It can't be happening.
For a long time, I didn't want to even have anything to do with it. And then a few years ago, this is before Mr. Dunning passed away, he really wanted to explore the concept of a sequel. So I worked with him a little bit, but none of the ideas seemed to gel for me at the time. And John would say, well, you know, we'll just wait until we find something that works. And then Mr. Dunning passed away. And then obviously I got busy doing other things. In the last year or so, I've come up with a concept that I think is worthy of a sequel. And so at the moment, I'm developing that. If everything works out right, maybe in a year or two, we'll get a chance to make a sequel, which hopefully by that time will be the film I wanted to make, and people will see it the way I would like to see it made. That would take days. Alf was probably one of the nicest human beings I've ever met. The most generous, kind, always in a good mood, always ready for a prank, but never a mean prank. His pranks were always somehow or other really good-natured. He was just a joy to be with. I was very lucky that before he got very, very ill, he was already ill, we had a reunion convention in Florida about a year and a half ago, I guess. And that was the last time Alf was out with us. And he was just wonderful. He was not well, very unwell actually, but you would never know. Alf just was, again, the life of the party. Alf is what we see in this movie. Alf is the guy that goes, wah. Alf is the one with the bad jokes. Alf was the one with the incredibly silly puns, but all of them just in such a good-natured fashion. You know, every time I think of Al, you know, I'm really sad that we lost such a talented and wonderful human being. Well, the only thought would be that, you know, I thank Shout Factory for coming out and doing this in the proper way, and I hope that the viewers will also enjoy it as much as I enjoyed making this film.